Rewind to September 2025 Tokyo. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone steps into the National Stadium for the 400 meters final and runs 47.78, second fastest 400 in history, 18 hundredths away from Marita Koch's 47.60, a world record that has survived since 1985, since before Sydney's own mother was in high school. That's where she left the sport. That's the number she's walking back into athletics carrying. Now here's the update. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone is a mother. Her daughter Savannah was born in July 2026. She said her return will be gradual and she hasn't locked in exactly which event she's coming back to. Hurdles, flat 400, maybe both. Nothing confirmed. No date, no race, no announcement. But that uncertainty is exactly what makes this one of the most fascinating comeback stories modern track and field has ever produced. Because you have to understand what she actually is before you can understand what's at stake here. Sydney didn't just win at the 400 hurdles, she rewrote what that event was supposed to look like. She broke the world record, then broke it again, dropping it from 51.90 down through 51.46, then 50.68, then 50.65, until she finally landed on 50.37, on numbers so far ahead of everyone else that the rest of the field is still chasing the version of her from years ago. 2 Olympic golds in the event, a career built on redefining a discipline that people thought had already been figured out. And then, instead of defending that turf, she walked away from the hurdles entirely and stepped onto the flat 400. A race with a completely different rhythm, completely different demands, completely different muscle memory, and on her global championship debut, at a World Championships, under the exact kind of pressure that ends careers, she ran 47.78. I said it before, and I'll say it again. That's not a good debut. That's one of the greatest single performances in the history of women's track and field. She didn't just prove she belonged in the flat 400, she hinted in one race on her first real attempt that she might become one of the best pure one-lap runners the sport has ever produced, not the best hurdler who also runs flat, potentially one of the greatest 400-meter runners, period. Now bring in Allyson Felix for a second. Felix became a mother in 2018, went through a difficult delivery, and still came back to compete at an Olympic level for years afterward, adding more medals to a collection that made her the most decorated athlete, male or female, in US track and field history. That's the precedent, that's the door Sydney's walking through. This isn't uncharted territory anymore, it's just rare enough that every time it happens, the entire sport stops and pays attention. So here's the real question, could Sydney come back stronger? Not because motherhood magically makes anyone faster. That's not how this works, and nobody should pretend it is. But because of everything sitting around it, a full physical reset after years of back-to-back championship seasons. Time to rebuild without the accumulated wear of a decade at the top. A different kind of motivation now that there's a daughter watching every step of it. And she's still only 27. In 400-meter terms, that's not aging out of anything. That's prime. But look at what has happened while Sydney has been away. Mary Lady Paulino hasn't slowed down for a second. The Dominican Republic's Olympic champion is still ranked world number 1, still stacking Diamond League wins, still the woman everyone in this event has to find a way through. Salwa Eid Nasser is still right there behind her, a former world champion in her own right, still capable of running down a field in the closing 50 meters when it matters most. And then there's the new generation Sydney has never even shared a track with. Henrietta Jaeger, 23 years old, out of Norway. She's run 49.15 this season and just won European gold in Birmingham in 49.04, a national record, and she did it by daylight. Nobody in that final could even live with her pace. Then there's Lourdes Gloria Manuel, Czech Republic, 20 years old, already a world indoor champion. She ran 49.37 outdoors in June. Have you really stopped to think about what that means? A 20-year-old running that kind of time, and still by every account just getting started. Add Natalia Bukowiecka, Amber Anning, Nikisha Price into the mix, and this is a field that has gotten dramatically deeper since Sydney last stood on a start line. What used to separate the good from the great in this event is now just Tuesday. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because Sydney isn't walking back into the same 400 meters she left behind. She's walking back into a race where multiple women are now running 49 low as a matter of routine. A few years ago, that kind of depth simply didn't exist in this event. Now it's the baseline you need just to make a final, so picture it. Paulino, Nasser, Jaeger, Manuel, Bukowiecka, and Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone somewhere on that start line again. That's not just an exciting race to watch, that's potentially one of the most stacked 400-meter fields the sport has ever assembled. Because Sydney's personal best doesn't just belong in that group, It sits in a completely different statistical tier above every single one of them. If she comes back anywhere close to 47.78, she doesn't just join the conversation, she ends it before it starts. Now let's talk about the number nobody's said out loud yet, 47.60. Marita Koch, 1985. The longest-standing individual world record in the sport, older than almost every athlete currently racing for it. Sydney is already 1800ths of a second away, and she got there on essentially her first real attempt at the distance in a championship final, with no dedicated build-up to the flat 400 the way a specialist would have. So here's the question, not will she definitely break it? And that's too simple. And honestly, nobody on earth can promise that. Least of all, Sydney herself. The real question is this: could the biggest statement of her comeback be an attempt at 47.60 itself? Could that number become the whole point of coming back? She hasn't said that's the plan. Nobody has confirmed anything close to that. But you don't run 47.78 once on your first try and not have that number sitting somewhere in the back of your mind for the rest of your career. Now imagine that athlete coming back with another year or two of maturity stacked on top of it. Think about the difference between the Sydney who first stepped up to a global final, trying to prove she even belonged there, and the Sydney who now already knows exactly what it feels like to win. She's felt Olympic gold more than once, she's felt world titles, she's run under the kind of pressure that quietly ends most careers before they really start. That experience doesn't disappear when you step away for a year. If anything, it sharpens while you're gone. So here's the question nobody can answer yet. Have we possibly been watching the beginning of a completely different chapter of her career? Could the next version of Sydney be more patient, more efficient, more dangerous over the final 100 meters than she's ever been? Does the flat 400 become the permanent focus from here forward? Or does she eventually go back to the hurdles event that made her famous in the first place? Could 47.60 become the single challenge that ends up defining the rest of her career? Nobody knows. That's the entire point of this story. Now picture the moment itself. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone back on a track, lining up for her first serious 400 since becoming a mother. The stadium isn't just watching a race unfold, it's waiting on a number to appear on the clock. Imagine she opens somewhere around 49 seconds, rusty, rebuilding, finding her legs and her rhythm again after everything her body has been through. Then imagine the next race after that, back toward 48. Then imagine the version of her, maybe a season or two down the line, that starts closing in on 47.60 all over again. None of that has happened yet. No date, no confirmed event, no official announcement. But the fact that we can even imagine that progression and have it feel completely realistic tells you everything you need to know about what she already proved in Tokyo. So is Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone simply coming back to athletics? Or is she coming back for another version of greatness entirely, one nobody has fully seen yet? Because if she returns healthy, rebuilds that speed, and finds anything close to the level that produced 47.78, this might not be a normal comeback at all. It could be the beginning of one of the most extraordinary chapters this sport has ever watched unfold. Subscribe to our channel. Let's hit 8,000 subscribers. Thanks for watching.
We dropped some new merch! Head over to our YouTube channel and browse apparels from our store. Thanks for your support!